Hey everyone, Georgie here with Ukraine Matters. We have a lot of news, so let's go right to it. First things first, the two topics that I really wanted to cover, but I just don't have the time, and we're going to cover it in maybe next video. One is the recent shooting of the Robert Fico in Slovakia, and we're going to talk about it next time. And the second one, it's a very lengthy discussion about the removal of Shoigu and a whole reshuffle in the Russian Ministry of Defense. So we start today with looking at what's happening in the front line, because I covered some of it, but I didn't cover everything in a previous video. It's still very relevant, so if you haven't seen previous video, I would really recommend you watch it. It's still very good. So firstly, a couple of clarifications. In my last video, I did mention that the situation around here is not as terrifying as a lot of media and a lot of reporters claim from the area. And I explained that even after the first couple of days, the language that they have been using changed significantly. Instead of, oh my god, it's Kharkiv is about to fall, they changed it to like, oh, it's actually maybe not as terrible. And I want to be very, very precise, because some people listen to me and then says like, oh my god, but Georgie says that everything is fine. No, everything is not fine. The situation is pretty hard for defenders of Ukraine. Remember, Ukraine doesn't have enough resources, including the human resources, so they have to get stretched. So that's why the Russian plan is here. That's why we talk about it. But it's not easy. It's hard. People are dying there. Like, the situation is pretty bad, and there are problems with defense lines. There are places where these defense lines were not established. There are places where these defense contractors just stole the money, and there is a corruption involved. There's cases for this. There are cases for some of the troops were not ready to fight, so they retreated from their positions. Those are the things. But what I want to always underscore is that we don't need to get into the externalities. We don't need to see something, and the important thing is to understand the big picture where we take away some of these externalities. Because on one side, people say, oh, there is no defenses on the border with Russia in that region, and then people like that actually go there, they start looking around, it's like, oh, the defenses are actually there. It's just they're right not on the border. And then we talk about, well, there are no minefields. Yes, and then videos appear of Russian troops being struck, being exploded on the minefields. Because, look what they did. They mostly moved as a first wave. Instead of using the armored assaults that they did before, they instead did the trooper assaults. And this is where one of the problem comes, that there is a lot of anti-tank minefields, but there is not as many as anti-personnel minefields. And I want to be very, very clear. What we saw, the minefields that we saw in the southern direction during the Ukrainian offensive, it's a skewed perspective of how a minefield should look like. Right? We discussed this very extensively when the Ukrainians were on the offensive. And then finally, people say, oh, Russians are just being allowed to waltz in and like nothing is happening, no one is fighting them. And then on the other hand, we're seeing like these 10s, 20s, 30s, like in hundreds basically already by this point, of videos of Ukrainians striking with artillery, with drones and everything that they got, the Russian troops. So that's what I'm saying. There is a lot of yelling about, oh my god, everything bad, everything's falling apart, yet when you actually kind of look at the situation as a whole, minus certain errors which needs to be fixed, which need to be addressed, then the situation is actually, yeah, like, because look, this area used to be occupied by Russia. Russia has fallen beyond the borders, but the fact that the Russians went beyond the borders doesn't mean that the war stopped in the area. It just means that Russians are now on the other side. Approaching the border is not the same as in peaceful time. You cannot just get like heavy equipment to make fortifications near the border. It is still essentially, when you see the border, that's the front line. You don't really see other places, some excavators coming directly to the front line to dig trenches, do you? So, yes, what I'm stating is that, and I've heard to this argument, it's like, yes, but Russians were able to build fortification in the south. Yes, because that was specifically during the period, if you don't remember, during the first year, where in winter, Ukraine was receiving jack shit. from the supplies. And they were, again, very short on resources. They were able to strike certain things, but they were not able to strike other things. So Ukraine didn't have cluster munitions back then. Ukraine didn't have tanks. Ukraine didn't have APCs and so on. You need to be really, really careful when you state, oh, it's like, oh, back then there was something. Back then is not a valid argument if the situation was completely different and the balance of power was completely different. So what's the situation right now? There are, in general, two directions that are stated. Russia has committed some of their initial forces. The initial waves have been now stopped. The situation is being stabilized, but Russians are now bringing in reserves, and more importantly, they're now bringing in their armor. And now that as their first waves of troops came in, the Russians are now bringing their armor. One is the settlement of, it's called Liptse. And Liptse, it's best to be seen on the satellite map. So as you can see, Liptse is not like a one small settlement. It's actually quite an extensive and very, very long, chain of settlements that is being controlled. So all of this area, every urbanized area, is going to be sort of a natural fortification. Yes, it is said that it's being destroyed, that the people are fleeing, that the civilians are being targeted. We know that, but we're trying to understand the war in as a whole. So right now, Russians are trying to get into this northern part of Liptse, and some media is already stating that this means that Liptse will fall, but Liptse is pretty long, so before it even falls. And also the main defense line starts a little bit lower than where Russians are right now. Then the second place is Vovchansk, quite an important settlement. However, some reported that Vovchansk is a key settlement in the Ukrainian defense line in the north. That is not true. Vovchansk is not part of the defense lines. It's actually something that the people, specifically, for example, what was it, the Butusov, that came in there, he actually discovered that Vovchansk is not part of the Ukrainian first and main line of defense. That defense line is actually starts behind Vovchansk. It is, however, quite a nice settlement to still hold and to use to stop Russian aggression. And fights are now ongoing in the northern part of the settlement, right over here. Russians, as I said, coming in with additional heavy equipment, and Ukrainians are answering. There are new experienced brigades that came in to help, and the fight is ongoing. So far, it doesn't seem that Russians are gonna advance as far, but this is now, we're going back to a slog, and this is the slog warfare at back. So we should not expect Russians to suddenly break through with some major offensive. And this is, again, something that we always need to consider, that if we see, for example, Russians in 3 days move 6 kilometers, that does not directly mean that in 6 days they will move 12 kilometers in. That's not how it works. And again, response is here. And more importantly, there is a good natural barrier here. If you can see, that's like a small river, and natural rivers are really good defensive barriers, as was demonstrated for this war. So all in all, Ukrainian reinforcements have arrived. Russians are also sending their reinforcements, but stabilization is ongoing. Russians are not even close to the first line of defense. They're still kind of trying to get over this initial gray area around the border. And a lot of the overhyped or over panicked statements that, oh my God, nothing is happening, everything is bad, Ukraine is falling apart, are actually full of shit. But let's go back to the map, because I still want to cover a couple of places on the map. One of the things is, as I explained, Russia will try to exploit certain things on the map, and there are already exploiting attempts. Recently, there was a pretty big attempt by Russians to move towards the Terny area. They wanted really to get into the village, and it was a big attack. There is a lot of videos about this, but it all obviously flew under the radar because of what's happening in Kharkiv area. But it was all repelled. Right now, Russians are probably licking their wounds and thinking about how they would like to attack this again. But we will see and monitor. So far, Ukrainian defenders are holding the area, and it's going well. Then there was a little bit of a movement from this on the Seversk direction. So this pocket over here. This pocket is a pain in the ass for Russians, and they were able to kind of get a little bit of this area around Vesele, so to get a couple of hills here, and some media sources instantly started, oh my god, the area is collapsing, but obviously it's not. This whole area over here is a big fortification all in all. So every couple of meters, like 100 of meters for Russians to move here through, they need a significant effort. They need like a full planned operations to get through. This is not an easy nut to crack. Russians would really need to put a lot of effort and reserves in this area, and so far it seems that they're just trying to exploit the fact that Ukrainians had to pull some experienced brigades towards the north direction. Also, important thing, when we talk about the northern direction and Russia pulling troops, that doesn't mean that there's going to become less troops in the eastern direction. What it's going to mean is that the areas that are defended by Ukraine will be more likely to be defended by maybe less experienced troops, where more experienced troops will be sent to deal with the Kharkiv offensive. And that means that the defenses will be less capable than before. And secondly, it means that there's going to be less rotations for relax sessions for the Ukrainian troops, because right now they are needed elsewhere on the front line. Again, I'm hoping there will be more mobilization drive in Ukraine, and this situation will be reduced. What is important is that the situation around Chasiv Yar is pretty much stalled. Russians did not reach what they wanted. They are not even close to reaching this. And right now, there are some rumors that they are preparing for something. There are some skirmishes, but they are not advancing. And another thing is Ocheretine. Remember, this is what we were expecting. This is what I was monitoring, because I wanted to find out whether or not Russians will use the fact that Ukraine had to kind of respond to the northern offensive, and then they try to use this and try to push forward in Ocheretine. And so far, Ocheretine has been, I mean, I cannot say it's silent, because there's still a lot of fighting going on. But there has been no advances from the Russians here almost at all. Minor ones. I'm going to monitor this. If within like a week and a half, 2 weeks, Russians will not attempt another some kind of strong breakthrough, then we can say that their plan about the northern offensive to try and was actually really bad. And it actually backfired. And another thing I wanted to mention, because there is some Russian telegrams mentioned that Russians took over Robotina. It's false. It's been completely denied. Guys from Robotina said that's no, it's still a gray area because it's fully bombed, but the Russians do not control here anything. So why is this a problem for Russia? Because this is backfiring. This can backfire really bad for them, as now that they're dedicating troops, they're also overextending themselves, and they are creating situation now with Ukraine receiving more help, which we're going to talk about just a little bit later. Ukraine might have an opportunity to utilize that overextension and potentially undercut Russians in one or more positions. I think this is something that General Syrskyi is considering. General Syrskyi is known for the situation, and I think some kind of a fat victory for Ukrainians would be a big motivator. But we maybe talk about this in detail sometime later. Right now, Ukraine is still getting resources to kind of get even with Russia, so let's not jump ahead of ourselves. But Ukraine is jumping, and Ukraine is doing its job. Specifically, they're continuously pummeling Crimea. They really want to turn off all of the anti-air systems in Crimea. There were two very notable strikes. The first strike was on the Belbek air base, which is right north of Sevastopol, which is in this area over here, right north of Sevastopol. And in that area, the supposed targets were anti-air systems that were on the airbase, and more importantly, there were supposed to be planes. The results are unconfirmed. There are confirmed pictures of the strikes that destroyed the Russian S-400 systems, like the whole setup. But there is also unconfirmed strikes that they destroyed also the MiG-31 that they've destroyed three Su-27, and that apparently 10 additional Russian either pilots or technical staff were killed on the strike. It was a very, very good strike by Ukrainians, and again, Ukraine is dead set on to just disable any kind of anti-air systems in Crimea. Second strike is very, very interesting because second strike is on a top secret facility, and it's a top secret facility not because it's top secret, but because of how it's being treated in Russian information space. Like, is it being hidden? Are the documents about it trying to have like secret stamp on it? But Ukrainians found out about it, and basically they have struck it. So let me see. I think it was right over here. So this area over here on this mountains range, Ukrainians have struck the Russians on the Ipetri mountain, and it's notable because I've been there. I've been on that mountain, on the place where Russians have this top secret base built. I've been in that area specifically. And on this mountain, Russians put like a secret base where supposedly a couple of high-ranking officers got killed and additional anti-air systems were struck. So very good job by Ukrainians. Again, they're really, really focusing to make sure that there is little to no anti-air systems in Crimea whenever I believe F-16s will come. And I think Ukraine has a plan, and it might something to do with something that starts with a B and ends with a ridge. Then there was another news where some news stated that Budanov, which is the chief spy of Ukraine, supposedly is like panicking and saying that, oh my God, Russians are coming, we will not be able to stop it, and so on and so on. And I am not sure what they're talking about, because if you listen to Budanov, firstly, like whatever Budanov said, you need to divide it by 10, because one of his jobs is to misinform. It's his little direct responsibilities. But secondly, let's just listen what he says about Russians, and let's kind of talk it over, because this is about the Russians coming for Sumy region, which is north of Kharkiv, like north area of Kharkiv, not northwest. So he says, and I'm going to direct translate, so don't worry about this. So he says that Russians from the initial attempts were considering to attacks towards Sumy direction. They said that they have been planning an operation in the Sumy region. Right now, they are still having small concentrated forces near the border of the Sumy region. He's explaining the specific settlements where they're located. And he says that the situation so far have not allowed them to try and start this operation. So there we go. This is what Budanov says. I literally just translated you his word directly. So the plan was for Sumy, for Russians, and they're planning to do something, but the situation is not favoring them, and so far they're not doing it. That is not him panicking. That is him saying that we know what is happening, we are preparing for this, and we are being ready and we're monitoring. That is what he's saying. So I don't know why people are panicking about this. But there are certain things don't change. For example, Russian occupiers, as soon as they entered Ukraine, they started, you guessed it, looting. Right away. As soon as they got to the villages, they're like, oh my God, such a good mattress. Let's get this and loot stuff. I'm pretty sure this is just a small thing of what they actually looted, but it's good to know that Russians just never change. Another question that was asked for me, well, Georgie, but what about this Russian Freedom Legion and so on? So the Freedom Legion of Russia, it is fighting right now on the eastern side, but the Russian Volunteer Corps, They are actually in Vovchansk, in the area where the Russians are, in the Kharkiv region. So they have filmed their fighting in that area, and they have published it. So the Russian Volunteer Corps, the Russian volunteers, they are fighting against the Russian invaders. So it's really, really good. Another kind of an update, some people were really afraid that these Russian tanks are going to be completely immune from the strikes of drones. That is not true. There has been appearing many, many videos right now of Russian coup-style tanks being struck by FPV drones. It's a protection. It makes job a little bit harder for drone operators, but they are not invincible. One of the major news in recent time that I absolutely loved was that Secretary Blinken came to Kiev, and he did a little bit of a cultural rodeo. He went around, talked with a lot of people, really showed the support of Americans for Ukraine. And I think that was one of the best things ever. And I'm going to leave a link to this video in the description, but it's absolutely amazing. Yes, so Secretary Blinken actually performed at one of the Ukrainian bars. And I think this is one of the most heartwarming and important messages that is sent to Ukrainians. Maybe not the ones that are following the front lines, the people that are really dedicated to the war. But for a lot of Ukrainians, the civilians, this is golden. But for other Ukrainians, there is also good news. For example, US is considering sending additional Patriot missile battery, and I really hope that happens. And I really hope that there is going to be more help being sent to Ukraine. And General Secretary Blinken actually was at the end of his trip, he announced indeed that US is now dedicating additional 2 billions for the Ukraine, was it foreign weapons production, foreign weapons manufacturing programs. So basically, Ukraine can use these $2 billion dollars as funds to purchase already manufactured weapons from any other international countries. It's a great help, and the best part about this, it's a fast help. I don't know why it's not been US manufactured. I thought like the whole point was that US gets the money for the manufacturing. I think Ukraine would not say no to the US manufactured weapons, but maybe it's gonna go towards purchasing some Soviet style equipment, Soviet style ammo, and so on. So that is very good, and that is very important. Thank you so much, US, and I think it's really, really great. But talking about help, to kind of wrap it all up, you obviously know that I and this community, we run this patch campaign with regards to the buying of the Vampire Night Hunter drone that goes around and just strikes Russian armor and just engulfs Russian hearts in fear. I think that is amazing. And I'm going to leave you at the end with a video from our friend here from Sanat. And we already are more than halfway with this drone, but I want to ask you, like, only donate to this if you have some additional disposable income. What I would like to us to donate is something that is absolutely wonderful. It's, I would say, a Cinderella story, but Jake Broe has one of the biggest channels on YouTube that is supporting Ukraine. So it's not really a Cinderella story, is it? But Jake has started his campaign for his 40th birthday to gather 40,000 for trucks to support Ukraine. But this went viral, and all the NAFO and everyone that is watching this community and other parts of communities, Jake's community, they just went wild. And guys, I think we are on the way to gather up to $1 million to support this movement. So I want to urge everyone in my community to participate in this amazing movement. I think if we can definitely get 1 million for Ukraine, I think this is something that is going to make a stamp, and it's absolutely incredible. I couldn't hold myself. I obviously also participated because I need to be part of this. This is history in the making. Thank you so much for watching this video. This weekend, I'm going to Berlin. I'm going to meet with Starsky and some other notable Ukraine supporters. We're going to do a lot of interviews. We're going to do some recordings, maybe live stream. And I'm going to come back and I'm going to share it all with you. I'm going to also record at some point video about the situation with Fico and situation with the Putin's reshuffling. But now I'm going to leave you with Sanat. Thank you so much for being with this community. Thank you so much for supporting Ukraine. Slava Ukraini, I love you guys, and I'll see you next time.
Well, hello Georgie, hello Ukraine Matters. My name is Sanith. I am now just south of Vovchanska, which has been in the news quite a bit as the Russians have tried to push across the border. You can hear heavy shelling taking place just north of here. About 20 kilometers is Vovchanska and the Russian border, but I can also hear shelling taking place over on the east. I'm at the point where they are evacuating the refugees to. There's a refugee center just here. It's really quite sad. Very old people, a lot of disabled people, bringing what little they have in bags, sometimes with their pets. Which is why we've launched this fundraiser for the Baba Yaga drone, the vampire drone, because this device has capabilities to take out this heavy artillery, the heavy equipment that they use to cause this kind of damage. So with your support, we'll be able to deliver for the guys and give them the tools they need to do their job. Thank you very much.